There is a moment that happens 1,000 times a day in lobbies, boardrooms, and at the edge of networking events. Someone finally gets their 2 minutes with a person they admire, a gatekeeper, an investor, a boss who holds the keys. They step up, pulse racing, hand extended, and they say it. "I'd love to pick your brain," or "I'm looking for a mentor," or, worst of all, "Do you have any advice for someone like me?" The powerful person smiles. They shake the hand. They offer a generic platitude about working hard, and within 3 seconds of turning away, you are completely, permanently forgotten. You walked away thinking you made a connection. In reality, you just triggered an invisible trapdoor. Most people spend years wondering why the door to the inner circle keeps slamming shut in their face. They assume they weren't charming enough. They assume they didn't go to the right schools or have the right pedigree. They think access is a game of likability. It is not. Access is a game of cognitive load. The minds of high-status individuals, people who are busy, targeted, and highly leveraged, do not process new social interactions the way average people do. They are approached constantly. Every single day, someone wants a piece of their time, a slice of their capital, or a drop of their influence. Because of this relentless pressure, their brains develop a ruthless, unconscious sorting mechanism. The moment you open your mouth, you are being scanned. You are being dropped into one of 2 boxes. Box 1, a liability. Box 2, an asset. A liability is anyone who requires energy. If you ask for advice, you are a liability. If you ask for a favor, you are a liability. If you require them to stop what they are doing to orient you, soothe you, or teach you, you are a liability. When you walk up to a titan and ask them to mentor you, you are asking them to take on a second job. You are broadcasting, without meaning to, "I have nothing to offer, and I am here to consume." Assets, on the other hand, are people who absorb pressure. They do not extract energy, they provide it. They solve a problem before the powerful person even has to articulate it. This is the great illusion of networking. You are told to put yourself out there. You are told to shoot your shot. But the brutal truth is that power does not negotiate with potential. It only answers to proof. Think of how this plays out on modern social media or in email inboxes. A young professional sends a cold email to a CEO, 5 paragraphs detailing their passion, their degree, and their dreams, ending with a request for a 15-minute coffee chat. That email is deleted before the 3rd sentence. Why? Because passion is common and time is scarce. Now, imagine the inverse. Someone sends a 3-line email. "I noticed the payment gateway on your checkout page is dropping mobile users by 4%. Here is the exact snippet of code to fix the API error. No reply needed." That person is not asking for a coffee. They are not asking for a favor. They have forced the gatekeeper to experience their value before they ever asked for a seat at the table. They bypass the sorting mechanism entirely by leading with undeniable utility. When you attempt to jump the line, seeking importance before you have established usefulness, you trigger a defensive reflex in the powerful. They view you as a parasite. You might be a polite parasite, a well-meaning parasite, but a parasite nonetheless. To become valuable, you must completely invert this dynamic. You have to stop viewing the powerful as vending machines where you insert charm and extract favors. You must start viewing them as overloaded systems that require optimization. Your only goal, in the beginning, is to be the patch that fixes the leak. If you are currently frustrated because you cannot get the attention of the people above you, you must accept a cold reality. You have not given them a selfish reason to care. The world does not owe you an audience just because you have ambition, but realizing you've been playing the wrong game is only the first step. The next is understanding what currency these gatekeepers actually trade in. Let me pause here for a brief moment. I want to step out of the pure strategy and look at the raw, unfiltered psychology behind why we do this. Why do we naturally default to being takers when we meet someone influential? It is not because we are bad people. It is a psychological reflex called rejection sensitivity. When we stand in front of someone holding massive power, our ego panics. We feel instantly small, so we rush to extract a favor, a smile, or a piece of advice, just to validate our own existence in their eyes. Recognizing that internal fear is the very first step to neutralizing it. I want to take a second to genuinely thank those of you who consistently support this channel. It takes a rare kind of intellectual maturity to listen to these harsh, uncomfortable truths without getting defensive. Your presence here proves you are building that psychological armor. We are building a community of strategists, not victims. So, let us continue. Once you stop the bleeding of neediness, what exactly do you replace it with? Let's look at the actual currency these gatekeepers trade in. The currency of influence is not charisma. It is not a perfectly optimized resume, a warm smile, or the ability to command a room with a loud, booming voice. The currency of the elite is quiet, undeniable competence. If you do not possess this, all the networking hacks in the world will only serve to expose your mediocrity to more important people. To truly understand how this dynamic dictates the flow of power, you only need to look at the ecosystem of any high-stakes corporate environment. Picture a ruthless, fast-moving arena, an aggressive venture capital firm, a political campaign, or a tech startup on the verge of a critical launch. In every one of these offices, human behavior splits into two distinct archetypes. First, there is the social climber. The climber is intensely focused on optics. They are always visible, always hovering near the center of gravity. They are the first to speak up in strategy meetings, using corporate buzzwords to mask a lack of original thought. They are the first to schedule unnecessary coffee chats, and the first to tactically position themselves to claim partial credit when a project inevitably succeeds. They subscribe heavily to the exhausting, fragile modern religion of faking it until you make it. The climber genuinely believes that if they just project enough confidence, if they just talk loudly enough about their grand vision, eventually, someone with real power will buy into the illusion. Then, there is the executor. The executor operates in the shadows. They sit at the back of the room, observing the dynamics, conserving their energy. When the client database completely crashes at 6 o'clock on a Friday evening, triggering a state of panic, the social climber immediately begins drafting an email about how the team needs to align to find a solution. The executor ignores the email. They rewrite the failing script, manually migrate the corrupted data, restore the system, and quietly go home. They do not ask for a round of applause. They do not send a company-wide memo detailing their heroism. But the executive at the top of the chain, the one whose neck was on the line, notices. And in that silent observation, a permanent shift in leverage occurs. Here is the psychological truth that the social climber refuses to accept, and it is a truth that keeps them locked out of the inner circle forever. Words are a debt, results are equity. Every time you tell a powerful person what you are going to do, you are essentially taking out a high-interest loan against your own reputation. You are creating an expectation, a deficit of trust that must be paid back with flawless execution. Powerful people have heard 10,000 promises from 10,000 ambitious climbers. They are fundamentally immune to charm because they recognize charm for what it usually is, the default defense mechanism of the incompetent. When you approach a heavy hitter with a pitch about your vast potential, your eagerness, or your willingness to learn, you look like a child wearing your parents' suit. You are asking them to take a massive risk on your unproven future. But power does not negotiate with potential. It only answers to proof. Proof is entirely silent. It does not require a slick presentation or an elevator pitch. True leverage is built in the dark, far away from the eyes of the crowd. It is forged through hundreds of hours of isolated, unglamorous focus, mastering a rare skill, decoding a complex system, or building a network of resources that actually functions when the pressure spikes. When you take the time to build leverage in the dark, your reputation begins to precede you. You stop having to aggressively introduce yourself to people because the undeniable quality of your work has already made the introduction on your behalf. We live in a deeply insecure culture that worships constant visibility. We are conditioned by social media to believe that if you are not constantly broadcasting your every achievement, you simply do not exist. But for the Machiavellian player, overexposure is a critical vulnerability. When you constantly announce your intentions, you give your enemies ample time to prepare, and you give your superiors a reason to scrutinize your every misstep. If you simply shut your mouth, lower your head, and deliver undeniable, concrete results, you become a total anomaly. And in a sea of loud, anxious, insecure performers, an anomaly is highly magnetic. This realization is often profoundly validating for the quiet workers. The introverts and the technicians who have watched lesser minds get promoted simply because those minds were louder. If this is you, understand that your silence is not a weakness, it is a lethal tactical advantage, provided you are actually producing rare value. But for those who have relied heavily on networking events, firm handshakes, and borrowed confidence, this reality should serve as a chilling check on your ego. You cannot charm your way past a gatekeeper who measures human worth in sheer, objective utility. If you want to become valuable to the 1%, you must stop trying to be interesting and start trying to be indispensable. Being interesting buys you a drink at the bar. Being indispensable buys you the keys to the building. Think about the mechanics of this shift. If you can handle a crisis without needing permission, without needing emotional support, and without demanding immediate praise, you transition from being an employee to being infrastructure. You become the concrete foundation that the powerful person stands on to reach their own goals. They may not look down at the concrete every single day, but they know with absolute certainty that they would collapse without it. Executing this strategy requires a terrifying amount of patience. Human nature screams at us to seek immediate validation. When we do something exceptional, our instinct is to demand that the world acknowledges it right now. But the strategist ruthlessly suppresses that urge. They let the tension build. They allow the powerful person to discover their competence naturally, over time. When a leader discovers your value on their own, rather than having it shoved aggressively in their face, they take deep psychological ownership of that discovery. They feel as though they have unearthed a hidden gem that belongs exclusively to them, and human beings will always fiercely protect the treasures they believe they found themselves. You must learn to trade short-term recognition for long-term, unshakable leverage. Let the loud networkers collect their superficial likes, their empty promises, and their fleeting moments of attention. You are playing a longer, darker, and much more profitable game. You are building a fortress of competence that will be impossible to ignore when the inevitable crisis hits. But being highly competent in a vacuum won't get you inside the circle, not unless you know exactly where to aim that competence. You can be the sharpest tool in the room, but if you do not understand the blueprint of the person holding you, you will quickly be replaced by something blunter but easier to handle. Consider the tragedy of the brilliant Protégé. This is a scenario that plays out in high-pressure university labs, cutthroat law firms, and elite creative agencies every single day. A young, incredibly talented individual is finally given their shot. They are paired with a senior partner or a high-level mentor. The protégé is smart. They do the technical work flawlessly, but they carry a fatal, invisible flaw. They require constant, low-level emotional management. They knock on the door twice a day to clarify instructions that were already given. They send long, anxious emails asking for feedback on minor details. When a small conflict arises with another department, they immediately bring it to the mentor to referee, unconsciously seeking a parent rather than a partner. They believe that because they are producing good work, these minor interruptions are justified. They think they are simply being thorough. But let us look at the reality from the other side of the desk. The mentor does not get angry. They do not scream. They just get tired. The powerful person is already managing a massive cognitive load. They are balancing budgets, managing hostile competitors, and navigating office politics. Every time the protégé asks an unnecessary question, they are extracting a tiny sliver of the mentor's mental bandwidth. Over time, the mentor's brain unconsciously links the protégé to the feeling of exhaustion. The work is good, but the cost of the relationship is too high. Slowly, quietly, the access is revoked. The protégé is no longer invited to the critical strategy meetings. The choice assignments are handed to someone else, someone who might be less naturally gifted, but who operates autonomously. The brilliant protégé is eventually discarded, left standing in the hallway, completely baffled. They will spend the next 10 years telling anyone who will listen that the system is rigged, that their boss was intimidated by their talent, or that they were just dealt a bad hand. Here is the cold reframe. It is time to look at the dagger in the mirror. You are not locked out because of bad luck. You are not being ignored because the world is unfair or because people cannot recognize your brilliance. You are locked out because of the signals you broadcast and the incentives you create. If you are constantly finding yourself on the outside looking in, you must face the uncomfortable truth that your presence is creating work instead of solving it. You are forcing powerful people to accommodate your insecurities, your lack of context, and your need for validation. This realization should sting. It is meant to. But once the ego burns away, what is left is absolute, terrifying clarity. You are entirely in control of your own marginalization, which means you are entirely in control of reversing it. To become an asset, you must master the dark art of strategic empathy. In mainstream psychology, empathy is usually framed as a soft, moral virtue, the ability to feel someone else's pain and offer comfort. But in the realm of power dynamics, empathy is a tactical instrument. It is the ruthless, calculated observation of a target's ecosystem. It means studying their world so deeply that you can anticipate their bottlenecks before they even open their mouths. How do you do this? You stop talking about yourself. When you enter the orbit of an influential person, your own goals, your own history, and your own anxieties must temporarily cease to exist. You must become a ghost in their machine. Watch where their eyes go when the room gets tense. Notice which emails they ignore and which ones they reply to immediately. Identify their enemies within the organization. Discover the tedious, friction-heavy tasks they despise doing. Most people try to build a connection by finding common ground. They look for shared hobbies, or they try to bond over mutual acquaintances. This is amateur behavior. Powerful people do not want another friend. They want a friction remover. If you can identify the one operational headache that ruins their Tuesday mornings, and you quietly eliminate it without asking for permission, you have built a bond stronger than a decade of polite networking. Strategic empathy requires you to speak their native language. If they are driven by speed, do not send them a detailed philosophical analysis of a problem. Send them 3 bullet points and a solution. If they are obsessed with risk mitigation, do not pitch them a wild, disruptive idea. Pitch them a secure, insulated pathway to their goal. You must mold your output to fit precisely into the empty spaces of their psychology. You are not compromising your identity. You are translating your value into a format they can seamlessly absorb. This requires suppressing the desperate, entirely human urge to be understood. We all want someone to look at us, see our struggles, and validate our journey. Do not seek that validation from the people above you. Pay a therapist, talk to a trusted friend. But when you walk into the arena, you are there to decode them, not to force them to decode you. Power does not negotiate with potential, it only answers to proof. And the highest proof of value is the ability to walk into a chaotic environment and instantly align yourself with the apex player's unstated needs. When you execute this correctly, the shift in their behavior toward you will be almost entirely subconscious. They will not sit down and formally decide that you are important. They will simply notice that when you are in the room, their heart rate drops. They will notice that projects move faster. They will start looking for your face before they make a final decision, because your presence has become synonymous with clarity and relief. You transition from being an external entity they have to manage to being an internal extension of their own processing power. Once you know how to read their world and solve their problems, you must master the hardest discipline of all, knowing exactly when to vanish. We have all witnessed the painful unraveling of the over-eager follower. Picture a rising professional who has just delivered a genuinely excellent presentation to a senior executive. The executive nods. They approve the project. The meeting is effectively over, and the junior employee has won. But instead of packing their briefcase, accepting the victory, and leaving the room, they linger. They stay hovering near the door. They start over-explaining the methodology behind the presentation, seeking an extra, unnecessary layer of validation. They send a follow-up email 3 hours later, reiterating points that were already agreed upon. When they do not get an immediate reply, they send a text message the next morning under the guise of simply checking in. In the space of 24 hours, they have taken a rare moment of triumph and suffocated it completely with their own anxiety. Desperation has a scent. It is a foul, unmistakable odor that powerful people are highly sensitive to. Why do high-status individuals loathe neediness? Because their entire existence is already an endless series of obligations. They are constantly managing the aggressive demands of shareholders, boards, clients, and the public. When you bring neediness into their space, you are not offering a human connection, you are offering another tax on their limited resources. They instinctively recoil from people who need them in order to function. When you over-communicate, double-text, and linger past the point of utility, you are signaling to the apex player that you have no other options. You are broadcasting that your internal emotional regulation is entirely dependent on their external approval. And neediness is the ultimate destroyer of leverage. The foundation of Machiavelli and strategy is information asymmetry. When you speak too much, you bleed power. Every unnecessary word you utter is a micro-transfer of weight out of your hands and into theirs. You give them a complete, detailed map of your insecurities, your timeline, and your limits. But when you embrace strategic silence, you force the other person's imagination to do the heavy lifting. Let us examine the mechanics of the anxious pause. You are sitting in a boardroom. You have just proposed a tactical shift or named your price. The executive across the table leans back, steeples their fingers, and says absolutely nothing. They are testing you. The amateur feels the silence as a physical, crushing weight. Their heart rate spikes. They automatically assume the silence means rejection, so they start backpedaling. They dilute their own idea. They offer concessions before the opponent has even asked for them. The strategist understands that the silence is merely a mirror. They look calmly back. They do not twitch. They let the silence stretch for 5, 10, 15 seconds. The executive realizes they cannot break your frame. And in that exact moment, respect is born. This principle extends far beyond conversation. It applies to your physical and digital presence as well. If you are always available, always hovering, always the first to reply to an email at 2 in the morning, your perceived value plummets. Basic economics dictates that abundance destroys value. If your presence is guaranteed, it is effectively worthless. To make a powerful person crave your input, you must learn the weapon of tactical withdrawal. Deliver a flawless piece of work, solve a critical bottleneck, and then seamlessly disappear back into your own domain. Do not hang around waiting for a pat on the head. Let them experience the stark contrast between the chaos of their daily operations and the sudden smooth efficiency you just introduced. By retreating, you force them to realize that the peace they are currently experiencing is directly tied to your invisible hand. They will naturally reach out to pull you back in, and when they do, the dynamic has fundamentally shifted. You are no longer the beggar at the gate, you are the invited guest. Do not confuse this with being arrogant. Amateurs often confuse strategic restraint with being cold or aloof. Arrogance is just another form of insecurity. It is a loud, fragile performance designed to prove you do not care. True restraint is warm, polite, and entirely professional. You smile, you deliver the result, and you politely exit. You do not ignore emails to play immature games. You simply answer them concisely, stripping away the emotional filler. You are a professional mercenary. You do the job flawlessly, you wipe the blade, and you walk away. This level of control creates an irresistible mystery. Human beings are pattern-seeking machines. When a powerful person meets someone who operates with immense competence but demands zero applause, their brain cannot process the anomaly. It creates an open loop in their mind. They wonder why you didn't ask for a favor. They wonder why you aren't trying to extract something from them like everyone else. This curiosity is the hook. You have planted a seed in their mind that will grow rapidly in your absence. They will start tracking your movements. They will ask other people about you. You have forced them to chase you without ever taking a single step in their direction. Think back to the times you gave away your own power simply because you could not stand being ignored. Think of the follow-up messages you sent that went unanswered, leaving you feeling small, foolish, and exposed. That feeling is the direct, unavoidable result of chasing. When you chase, you immediately elevate the other person to a pedestal and lower yourself to the floor. You must sever the instinct to pursue. Restraint is a weapon forged in the fires of extreme self-discipline. It means having a brilliant idea and holding it back until the exact right moment, rather than blurting it out just to prove you are smart. It means receiving a compliment from a titan and simply saying thank you, rather than launching into a 5-minute speech about how much their approval means to you. You must become a vault, unbothered, contained, and entirely self-sufficient. Silence prevents you from ruining your position, but it is the final evolution that permanently secures your seat at the table. We have reached the apex of the game. This is the final pivot, the absolute transformation from admirer to architect. Consider the trajectory of the junior operative who quietly ascends to become the chief of staff. They do not achieve this through flattery. They do not sit in the boss's office telling them how brilliant their latest strategy was. Sycophants are a dime a dozen, and they are always the first to be discarded when budgets tighten or regimes change. The architect takes a completely different path. They look at the powerful person not as a mentor to be worshipped, but as a heavily fortified castle that requires maintenance. They start by sweeping the courtyard, then they repair the gates. Slowly, methodically, they take control of the internal defense systems. Eventually, a profound psychological shift occurs. The executive realizes they cannot make a major decision without looking across the room to gauge the architect's reaction. The boss no longer tells them what to do. The boss asks them what they should do next. This is not an accident. It is a deliberate, engineered entanglement. Here is the brutal truth about human nature that separates the players from the pawns. Admiration creates distance. Utility creates reliance. When you simply admire a powerful person, you are placing them on a pedestal. Pedestals are cold, isolating structures. You are signaling that you belong below them, looking up in awe. Influential people do not respect awe. They tolerate it. They may occasionally find it amusing, but they never, ever reward it with genuine power. If your only contribution to their ecosystem is making them feel good about themselves, you are entirely replaceable. Someone younger, cheaper, and more enthusiastic will eventually come along to provide that exact same ego boost. But utility. Utility is structural. When you become the load-bearing pillar in their daily operations, you transcend the category of an employee. You weave yourself into their operating system. The great strategist Machiavelli understood this perfectly. He observed that the most secure position a person can hold is one where the sovereign's survival is directly tied to their own. You must make it so that removing you from the equation would cause the powerful person immense, immediate pain. Your success must become completely indistinguishable from their success. To execute this final shift, you must ruthlessly kill your own fandom. Fans sit in the stands and cheer. Architects stand in the mud and build the stadium. You must stop acting like you are lucky to be in the room and start acting like the room functions because you are in it. This requires a massive reprogramming of your own self-worth. You can no longer view yourself as a subordinate begging for scraps of attention. You must view yourself as a highly specialized mercenary, deployed to solve problems that the apex player is too blind, too busy, or too arrogant to solve themselves. Think about the mechanics of this reliance. It starts small. You intercept a hostile email from a rival department and neutralize the threat before it ever reaches your boss's desk. You notice a critical flaw in a major contract, and you quietly rewrite the clause before the ink is dry. You do not rush into their office, holding the contract like a child showing off a drawing. You simply state that the vulnerability has been handled. Over months and years, this pattern of silent, lethal execution forms a psychological barricade around the powerful person. You insulate them from chaos, and human beings become hopelessly addicted to the people who insulate them from chaos. The architect understands that whoever controls the flow of information controls the sovereign. By volunteering to take on the most complex, unglamorous logistical nightmares, you quietly gain access to the raw data of the organization. You see the budgets. You read the private correspondence. You know exactly which clients are threatening to leave and which executives are secretly plotting a coup. This information is lethal, but you do not gossip. You do not wield it clumsily in the break room. You hoard it, you synthesize it, and you use it to quietly steer the powerful person away from traps they could not even see. Once you have established this level of reliance, the power dynamic completely inverts. They may hold the official title, they may sign the checks, but you hold the reins. They will begin to protect you fiercely, not out of the goodness of their hearts, but out of sheer, unadulterated self-interest. They will ensure you are paid well, they will shield you from corporate politics, and they will pull you up the ladder with them wherever they go. Why? Because letting you fall into the hands of a competitor would be a catastrophic strategic failure. This is the reality of the invisible VIP list. There are no bouncers, no velvet ropes, and no secret handshakes. The only way in is to prove that the party cannot continue without you. So, I want you to look at your own life. Look at the people above you, the people whose influence you have been desperately trying to attract. Are you acting like a fan, hovering at the edge of their vision, hoping they will casually toss you a favor? Or are you acting like an architect, quietly analyzing their structural weaknesses so you can build a support column they never knew they needed? Tomorrow morning, when you walk into your office, your campus, or your studio, you are going to drop the act. You are going to stop smiling at people who do not respect you. You are going to stop asking for mentorship, guidance, and permission. Instead, you are going to find the bleeding wound in the organization that everyone else is too lazy or too scared to touch. You are going to cauterize that wound. You are going to do it silently. And when it is done, you will step back into the shadows and let the results speak for themselves. Remember the fundamental law of this game. Let it echo in your mind every time you feel the urge to beg for a seat at the table. Power does not negotiate with potential, it only answers to proof. Build your proof. Forge your leverage in the dark. Become the asset they cannot afford to lose. And watch how quickly the heavy iron doors swing open. Before we close the book on this strategy, I want to leave you with one final, very real psychological anchor. As you start applying these laws, you will likely experience a strange phenomenon. When powerful people actually start relying on you, you might feel a sudden, sharp spike of imposter syndrome. Your brain will whisper that you tricked them, or that you are somehow being manipulative. Silence that voice immediately. Providing genuine, undeniable value is not manipulation. It is the highest form of professional respect. You did not steal your seat at the table. You built it. I want to deeply thank every single one of you for your continued support, your attention, and the sharp insights you leave in the comments. Your backing is what allows this channel to remain a quiet sanctuary for those who prefer cold reality over warm illusions. In our next video, we are going to dissect the psychological framework of the ultimate power move, how to say no to powerful people without losing your status, and in fact, how to use restraint to double their respect for you. Make sure you are subscribed so you don't miss it. Until next time, stay sharp and keep the dagger velvet.